So that's kind of the TikTok, as I like to say, even though now TikTok has trumped my use of that term, so I don't get to use it as much anymore. Tonight we have Dr. Melzer, who has traveled down from Berlin, New Mexico, to share with us a publication that he had recently in the New Mexico Historical Review, the Swastikas on Campus. So he's really looking at kind of this idea of sort of lived memory and sort of local history and a bunch of different things that helps us understand the sort of long history of NMSU and its use of the swastika, especially with the yearbook. So let me just turn to my notes now, though. So Richard Melzer is originally from Teddy Roosevelt's hometown of Oyster Bay, New York. He has lived in New Mexico since 1973. Dr. Melzer earned his PhD in history at UNM in 1979. He taught history at the University of New Mexico Valencia campus from 1979 to 2019, retiring as a UNM Regents Professor of History. He is a past two-term president of the Historical Society of New Mexico, and he is the author, co-author, or editor of over 100 articles and chapters, as well as over 30 books about New Mexico history. 10 of his books have won major awards. There's some down here, so I highly encourage you to take a look at them after tonight's presentation. Among the many awards he has received for writing, teaching, and service to his profession, he is most proud of receiving the University of New Mexico's most outstanding Teacher of the Year award. He is married to Rena Chavez and has two grown children, Cam and Rick, a granddaughter, Luisa Marie, and a grandson, Ben. Dr. Melzer and his wife, Rena, live in Berlin, New Mexico. So if we could put our hands together and welcome Dr. Melzer. You could probably try this if you'd like to. So I don't know, we could give it a shot. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
There. How is that working now?
Yeah.
All right, good. So far, so good. I appreciate it. But thanks for the introduction, Jerry. I had the pleasure of speaking to Jerry's class on campus this afternoon, and it was very interesting, really good students. That was a good time. Jerry mentioned that I do lots of speeches, presentations at state and everywhere across the state. And I always thought I did a pretty good job until one day I came home and I looked in my closet, our closet, and I noticed that there was a shoebox that I hadn't seen before. And I opened it up and there was a couple of eggs and about over $100 in $1 bills. So I went to see my wife, Rena, and asked her what that was all about. And she said, well, I was hoping you'd never notice that, but as long as you have, I guess I have to explain it. And I said, yeah, what are the couple of eggs and all that cash in the box all about? And she said, well, every time you do a bad job with a presentation, I put an egg in there. I said, that's pretty good. You know, there's only a couple of eggs in there and I give a lot of presentations. What's the cash? And she said, that's all the money I made off the other eggs. Thank you. So the deal is, if you laugh at my jokes, you don't have to pay a tax on the book. The bad news is, this is a serious topic tonight. I don't think there'll be much humor involved at all. I wanted to start definitely by thanking Dennis. Where is Dennis? In the booth. Dennis Gailey and his staff at the New Mexico State Archives and Special Collections. This project would be impossible without their help, above and beyond. They were so helpful the whole way through the beginning, the research and the revisions and just everything. They were so responsive and helpful. So thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate it. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, this is a presentation about swastikas. And I'm sure many of you know about swastikas. And we'll talk a little bit about the origin and background to it a little bit. But believe me, I'm no expert on swastikas. So if you want a discussion about that, this is not the right room to throw you down the hall because I know very little about it. And we need to focus on what I do know, which is the swastika in New Mexico history and culture. We're going to focus more than on the global level. We're going to focus here in New Mexico, specifically about New Mexico State. The other thing I don't want to talk about because I hate him so much, and it's distracting, is Hitler and his use of the swastika. Well, we'll certainly acknowledge that's where when all went wrong, and we converted a swastika to a symbol of hate, contrary to its usual meaning of peace and harmony. But I don't want to talk about the rise of Hitler and how he came to power and all that. That's an interesting discussion. But I really don't have time to do that tonight. So if you bring those things up, I'm going to go, huh? I'm going to remind you that we already agreed, I hope we agreed, that we would not be discussing those things tonight. Right? Let's see, I wanted to ask, and this is usually what I find when I go to different places, different organizations. The people who are there are interested in the topic, very often for personal reasons. How many of you are New Mexico State alumni? Ah, good. And how many of you are remember the yearbook was watching? All right, good. What was your year of graduation? 78. 78, just before the main events here in 1983.
For the benefit of our Zoom listeners, would you mind being a little closer to the laptop?
That's right. You told me that's the camera. So we'll be asking you if you'd like to chime in. Don't hesitate to talk about the role of swastika on campus leading up to 1983 crisis. So all that said, I guess we can start with this PowerPoint. These are images of organizations or cultures. And when you see these images, well, I'll show you a few. This one, of course, is the Red Cross, right? And we immediately, I hope we immediately, think of certain things when we see that symbol. It's an automatic. It's part of our culture. It's a cultural symbol. There we have the medical doctor, sure. This is clear. Yellow ribbons when veterans return home, or anyone who's lost returns home anymore. Automatic. Now, this is Amnesty International, right? This is the Olympics. And when you get the idea, when you see these things, it automatically triggers certain memories in your life, your experience, positive and negative. Sometimes here, of course, we have Winston Churchill with his famous V for victory, which we borrowed over the years. And of course, this is the old peace symbol with positive and negative emotions, depending on your point of view. And of course, is the Zia, which became part of our flag in 1924. Before then, it was from the Zia Pueblo, and they certainly knew it and understood it as a peace symbol, well-being and harmony and peace. But a few people beyond the Pueblo knew about the Zia symbol. Now it's everywhere, whether it should be or not. They don't get compensated enough, I don't think, for the use of the Zia. Here's the Democrats and the Republicans. That gets all sorts of emotions flowing, right? And this gets your attention, of course. That's the symbol for the old the Soviet Union, the communists, right? And that's the symbol of the swastika. So I hope you had a whole roller coaster of feelings and emotions based on those symbols alone, So the swastika is traced back, and now this is as much as I'll probably say, 5,000 years to the Indian Peninsula. And then it has been used by all these different cultures. It's amazing. There's hardly a culture, a civilization, a religion in the world history that did not use a swastika at one time or another. And it was almost universally a symbol of well-being and harmony. And when you think about it, wow, it's kind of a nice design. You know, if you can wipe away, if you can do that, wipe away all the negative images, ideas, associations with the swastika, then you might be able to understand why so many cultures were attracted to this particular design. So here are some world cultures that has used this symbol, and it goes on, and including Native Americans, Navajos, and Hopi, especially here in the Southwest. Regions and countries of the world, almost every continent, well, yeah, almost every continent has had at least one country that's used this symbol. And it's been used on petroglyphs. That's amazing to see a swastika on petroglyphs, on coins and seals, family crests, flags, jewelry, clothes patterns, tapestries, rugs. It's just amazing. And more, blankets, mosaics, pottery, et cetera, et cetera. And just amazing how many ways it's been used. So it was used in Hopi culture and by the Navajos. And this is the famous story of the whirling log. And as a result of that, the culture hero being caught up in the whirlpools there in the San Juan, he learns about great knowledge and wisdom, and he brings that back to the Navajo people for their benefit. And so now it's incorporated in the sand paintings, right? You see the sand paintings. And then after that, besides the religious, the spiritual meaning, it also is part of Navajo, Hopi, and other Indian cultures, arts, and crafts. And here you can see a basket. By the way, this is all pre-1940. Most of it happens. What's so significant about 1940 in just a minute? This is on a rug. Actually, it's a real tiny rug that a friend of mine gave me. But you can see it, and you can see the Native Americans didn't seem to care whether the swastika was open to the right or to the left. It didn't seem to make any difference to them. Here's a beautiful piece of jewelry, and then you study it closely, and you see those swastikas. But that's because it was so well accepted in the world, including here in the Southwest, as a great symbol, popular symbol. And here's some jewelry that's being advertised in a New Mexico newspaper, right along with ice cream. And here's some correspondence where they're ordering more Indian swastika jewelry. Same here. The symbol of good luck. So not only for the Native Americans, but definitely by the early 20th century in general. It became so well known and popular in the country as a whole. The other day, I went to newspapers.com. You ever do that search engine? It's a tremendous search engine. And I went 1900 to 1925 for the whole country. And I put swastikas. And I got 100,000 references. 100,000. Many here in the Southwest, but all over the country, from New York to California. And we're not talking, that's not a period where, the rise of Hitler, that comes later in the 1930s. He was still a barroom thug in the 1920s. So most of these references are to the traditional symbol as a Native American symbol of harmony and peace. So I did want to make that clear. It's just not the Southwest. Yes, sir.
What was the original name? Was it always swastika or different name?
Well, it was 5,000 years back on the Indian Peninsula. It was swastika, but over the years, it was named by different cultures, different things. So here are some commercial uses of this symbol. Could you imagine sending your grandkids moccasins with a swastika on it? $2, not bad. And here's a postcard. Here's a nice postcard about good luck. You send this to people who you want to have good luck. You see the horseshoe there, and the hearts, light and love, light and life and love, and swastikas in the middle, and right there around the border. Here's a good one, cards, playing cards. You want good luck in playing cards? You have this deck. This is a swastika hotel in Raton. And there were actually 3 of them. They weren't associated business-wise, but there was one in Raton, there was one Well, actually, there's more than that. One up in Farmington and one in Mountain Air. And we'll show you all those in just a minute. But here it is in Raton, a very popular place there on Main Street. This is the one in Farmington. And it's right there by the city park, and you would never know it was there still to this day unless you looked up at those symbols. And I guess not a lot of people looked up because it doesn't seem to be a big issue in town. But I had to do it, and I was taking pictures, and I got quite a crowd gathered around me to see what the heck I was taking pictures of in that building. From the Three Rivers what? Brewery. The brewery, yes. That's this side, right? That's the corner I'm standing on. Yeah. Here's a swastika, the hotel in, yeah. Let's see, where is that? In Cimarron. It's Cimarron. It's the fourth one. Cimarron. And here's the one in Mountain Air. How many people have seen the one in Mountain Air? Yeah, and Mountain Air, of course, is southeast of Albuquerque, about an hour and a half. And it's a real small town. It used to be a little railroad town, especially when they had the passenger service. But it's still there, the Schaefer Hotel. And you can see the swastikas along the top. When I first saw that, that's what got me interested in all this. Who is Schaefer? You know, and it sounds like a German name, doesn't it? Who is Schaefer? Was he a supporter of Hitler? And why did they leave the swastikas up there? Did the local people not object? You know, after all these years, it's still there. This is an early picture. You can see the cars, but they're still there to this very day. So I went to know about that history, and then I went on from there. Turns out Pop Schaefer built the hotel in the 1920s, way before the rise of Hitler, the national power in Germany. And he thought nothing of it. He just liked the Indian design. But most of all the interior is Indian designs. And he just borrowed it. Everybody knew Pop Schaefer in Mountain Air. They knew he was just a good guy, kind of strange, but a good guy. And he certainly wasn't a supporter of Hitler. Now it's sort of a tourist attraction. Although it's always being sold, if you're interested in buying the Schaefer Hotel, swastikas and all, it's yours for a bargain, I'm sure. Here's the Swastika Fuel Company, and you can see in the top of the building, and then over here on the side of the wagon. How many people have been to the Chemo Theater in Albuquerque? Yeah, so that's there, our Main Street. It's built in 1924, a major project. It's still a very important building, cultural center in Albuquerque and all of New Mexico. But I wonder how many people go to the Chemo and realize that there's at least 24 swastikas in the Chemo. And it's not because the architect, an Italian, by the way, if he was a fascist, he wasn't at all. He was just interested in Indian culture, symbols, and he was attracted to this particular symbol. So here I'm looking down from the second floor. That's the main entrance there. And if you look up from the doors as you're standing there, you see the swastika. You don't see it because I'm pointing and you can't see my finger. But you can see them right there in green. So you have to wonder how many people sit there waiting for a play to begin or a concert or whatever, and are looking around and they begin to notice these things. In fact, this is along the side of the stage. And then along the top of the stage are more. Just amazing. It was an amusing afternoon for me to find all the swastikas at the Chemo Theater. And here's the fuel company, Swastika. Now the swastika was a mining camp up by Raton. That's why they're talking about swastika and yellow coal. And here's a trading post in Albuquerque. And here's a curio shop, a trading post in Belen, my hometown. And here is the Swastika newspaper, the railroad, a real estate company, and lo and behold, Coca-Cola, and then the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, they all used it within their marketing. Just amazing. You know, it was so popular in the teens and the 1920s that when we made our new state flag in 1924, the odds were really good that they would have used a swastika, right? Instead, they found a Zia pot with a really interesting design, which very people had seen or ever used before, and that became, thank goodness, the design on our flag, but the odds were much better that they could have used a swastika. And then where would we be? But we're talking about a yearbook at a college. This is a much bigger issue if it had been our state flag since 1924, or at least in those early years. Even organizations. Here's a Swastika drama club in Little Roy, New Mexico. And here they have a dancing club in Roy, New Mexico, the Swastika Dancing Club. It was all for, there wasn't a bunch of, these are not fascist meetings or rallies, are they? They are social events. And then they had the Swastika Club in Albuquerque, Women's Club. And I mentioned before, the Boy Scouts. Then they had yearbooks. This is the first yearbook for the Belen High School, my hometown. And sure enough, they wanted to use popular symbols of well-being for now and in the future. And so for the freshmen, they put a swastika above the papoose, right? And then for the seniors, the older kids, I guess, they had a swastika for them too. And then, of course, let's begin to narrow in. This is a swastika, the very first yearbook at New Mexico A&M in those days. It was A&M, of course, until 1958. But 1907 is the beginning of the yearbook at New Mexico A&M. It was known as the swastika, and sure enough, they had it right in the middle. This is the height, very height of the popularity of this symbol as goodwill and harmony in the country, including New Mexico. Now, I'm from UNM, and I feel kind of funny doing this, criticizing New Mexico State in a way, but we have to say that in 1908, the following year, New Mexico created its first yearbook, and it's always been the Mirage. And it said the Mirage, and below it, it had a swastika. The first UNM yearbook had a swastika on the cover. And in the spring of 1908, when they were making the class charm for the senior girls at UNM, it was a swastika. Amazing. So we're you know, I hate to be picking on New Mexico State when there's other places that had it. There was a school back east who used it as a yearbook too. By the way, this was an article, I think someone mentioned it in the New Mexico Historical Review, and I brought some copies over here, and without charge. I think there's about 5 or 10 of them. Feel free to pick them up if you're interested for more details that I'm able to cover tonight. And so in the inside of the yearbook, they had all these Indian symbols to make the point that this swastika is one of a number of Indian symbols, and this is the one they're using for good luck. They could have used a lot of others. They had a contest to see what was the best name, and they decided on the swastika. So from 1907 to World War II, they were on the covers of the yearbooks. 51 in 1925, I believe, 51 swastikas, a collage, right? And they used them on the border. In 1936, I think there was about 24 of them on the border. So they thought nothing of using this. Now, I think it's really important, don't you, that we're looking at this in retrospect. A lot of people think of the swastikas and say, what are they thinking of? Why are they doing this? Well, that's all in retrospect. We know what came later. At the time, the rise of Hitler in the 1930s, the whole country, including people here at New Mexico State, believed this is a brutal madman who was going to go away. And he had hijacked
our symbol, the swastika. And why should we give it up? We should just wait for him to die or get out of office one way or another. So they were determined to keep the swastika. It was their tradition that they were defending. So here's the cover, 1936. And here's the staff. It doesn't look like any fascists are there to me. And then it was also used not only the yearbook at A&M, but also on a couple of buildings. Foster Hall. You all know where Foster Hall is on campus? It was built in 1930. This is the information right out front. 1930, named after a president of New Mexico State. And it was a new agricultural building. So they wanted well-being and harmony for the students and faculty in that building. So right there above the entrance, you look way up there, there is a swastika. And there's a much better view of it. And you can see there's other images there too, but the swastika is up there. As it is to this very day. Well, why do you think they keep it up there to this very day? Because nobody can see it. Nobody notices it very, very often. It's going to be pointed out before anyone even notices it. It will be in our discussion when we get to 1983. It becomes quite controversial. But it's still there to this day, and I guess nobody minds because it's not very visible. Then this is Kent Hall. Kent Hall, of course, is now the university's museum. And this is the lobby. And in the lobby over the fireplace, there's an R.C. Gorman print. But if you take the print away, it's a swastika. And I'd like to know, wouldn't you, when they put the print up, at what point did they want to cover it up? And why? What was the thinking about it at that point? Why were they concerned about various things? Maybe it was concealed during the 1983 controversy about the yearbook. I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows that. But it's interesting. It's still there. You can see the hanging hooks there, where the R.C. Gorman, and isn't that ironic? It's an R.C. Gorman Indian print over the Indian image of the swastika, right? And then to New Mexico State, the ROTC uniforms had the swastika on. The 45th Division of the National Guard in Arizona and New Mexico and Oklahoma had swastikas on their uniforms until the late 1930s. So other states, including Arizona, that's a state highway sign, and of course they want people to be safe and drive in harmony. So they put the swastika there. And here's a motel down in El Paso, the swastika at the entrance there. But then, of course, Hitler did hijack the symbol, and all those terrible things began to happen in Germany. At this point, I'd like to ask you if you have any comments or questions. All right, then we'll forge ahead. It was used by the Nazis, already a symbol of earlier German nationalistic movements, Aryan movements that supposedly proved that they were the superior race. They took the image, they tilted it to a side. It was identified as the symbol originally in Mein Kampf, Hitler's My Struggle. It was used everywhere, the Nazi party flag, the badge, the armband, uniforms, and it became a symbol of hate, racism, intolerance, and evil. For the rest of the world, for the Germans, it was still harmony, but harmony only for who? The Aryan race, right, for them, the so-called superior folks. Now, people in the 1930s, you know, most of the Americans in the 1930s were isolationists. They might be appalled at what Hitler was doing in Germany in the 1930s, but that was a madman in a specific country, and we had no business interfering in that country any more than we wanted any other country to interfere in our country. But things change. This is a breaking point. It's called the Night of the Broken Glass. November 9th, 1938. Now, when Hitler came to power in 1933, he discriminated against the Jews in many, many laws and ways. They couldn't enter certain professions, certain careers, certain businesses. The Jews had to wear armbands. And it wasn't only the Jews, it was gypsies and homosexuals. They were all discriminated, many minorities. But this got the attention of the rest of the world. This was the extreme that got the attention of everyone, even beyond Germany. And then, of course, it became international. This was way beyond Germany when Germany invades Eastern Europe, and then on and on until they get around to France and the Soviet Union, et cetera, et cetera. So this is beyond the borders. This is when the isolationists even agree it's time to get involved to stop this monster before he expands any further in the world. But now, in the late 30s, after the Night of the Broken Glass, and as Hitler is invading those countries in Europe, a lot of the hotels, a lot of the places that were named after Swastika here in New Mexico began to change their names. For example, hotels. People would go into the Swastika Hotel in Raton, tourists, and they'd see the sign Swastika, and they'd see the symbol, and they'd turn around and walk away. They didn't want anything to do with this. In other words, that hurt business. It hurt business. And the other hotels changed their name. The coal mining camp went from Swastika to Brilliant. Everything changed quickly, except for one place. They refused to change the name of its yearbook, and that was New Mexico State. Sure, for a lot of reasons, including it had nothing to lose in terms of money at this point. Now, later on, we're going to find out it's a real threat to New Mexico State and its budget. But at this point, it doesn't, so it's not as important that they change it. In fact, in 1940, the Hopis and Navajos signed an agreement. You can see it's there. They did in Arizona. They promised not to use the swastika in their jewelry or arts and crafts, commercial uses anymore. And here you are, they're signing on. Now that did not preclude them using it in what? In their spiritual ceremonies, including the sand paintings. But at least they promised that they wouldn't use it in their commercial work. So they, in New Mexico A&M, the students made surveys, whether they favored the use of the swastika or opposed it, 3 times during World War II. And if you add them all together, they favored keeping the name 251 to 112. That's substantial, isn't it? That's pretty convincing. Anything wrong with that number? It's little, very little. I mean, it's still a small campus, but this is minute. And we're going to see this over and over again. The student body favoring keeping the name, but very few people going out to vote. So this went on through World War II. And their feeling was no German dictator is going to hijack our name. They needed it for good luck, especially because 1,500 Aggies, faculty, students, and staff, served in World War II. 125 died, including on the Bataan Death March, and many were trained on campus in special programs. So it's a matter of pride for them, isn't it? Defiance to keep the name, not politics or betrayal. So they used the swastika name, but not the image again on the cover until after the war, 1947. So there, 1947, this is the first time the swastika appears on the cover of the yearbook after the war. And after it's used in, it varies from year to year. Most of the time, it's just the name, the swastika, not the symbol. In the 1970s, they began to stylize it, so you could hardly recognize that it was a swastika. Right after the war, most of the students were GIs who came here into universities across the country to use their GI Bill to get a good education. And they heard about the yearbook and the swastika. Some were upset about it, but most didn't care. Why were they here? To get an education, training to get on with their lives. They were more concerned about the fact there wasn't enough classrooms on campus, there wasn't enough faculty, there wasn't enough housing on campus or anywhere in Las Cruces for them and their families. Those are the issues they cared about. And they cared about other issues in the 50s, a controversy in renaming it New Mexico State University. Some people wanted to keep the A&M to emphasize the fact that it was a school of agriculture and mechanics. 1960s, a lot more students coming to New Mexico State, but very few protests. It was a very conservative college in regards to the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. It was mostly off campus, not on campus. It was not UNM by any means in terms of radical protests. They had a small local Jewish community. They didn't want to get involved with the Swastika. That seemed like a campus, they said, it was a campus issue, a small issue that does not involve us in the community. It was not worth falling on our sword, right? If you had a bigger issue that involves Jews, they might be interested, but not in a small thing like this. That was the thinking at the time. They wanted to choose their battles. So they use the name, but seldom the symbol. And so here's a collection of some of them. This is the 1947 one. We can see it's mostly the swastika, the name, rather than the symbol. So this changed by the late 1970s and definitely in early 1983. It's a perfect storm. One of Jerry's students, maybe it was you, Jerry, asked, why then? Right? Why not earlier? Why not later? And we always ask that when there's proposed change. Why are you bringing that up now? Why didn't you bring it up earlier? Especially those who oppose the change. But anyway, I say, and I think it's generally true, it takes a combination of factors to create a perfect storm. And when they come together, it triggers change. It triggers lots of controversy, as you'll see here at New Mexico State, but it comes together to make a difference at one time. So an increasing number of protest letters to the president, Gerald Thomas. Everyone remember Gerald Thomas, the president from 1980 to 84. In fact, when he got protest letters against the use of the swastika on the yearbook, he would send them a form letter. And the form letter said the same thing. We acknowledge the fact that it was a hated symbol, but it's a tradition on our campus. It means harmony and peace. And he always end by saying, I'm a veteran of World War II as well. And I care about this, but here on our campus, it has a different meaning. But it began to get national attention. And in fact, it was known as Swastika University. And Jerry, you asked me if any place actually called that. I do recall that either informally or in correspondence, some people began to refer, and who the heck wanted to be associated with Swastika University? That's a major factor. Because if you're a university that's identified with the Nazis, that's going to hurt student recruitment, isn't it? It's going to hurt student recruitment and retention. Maybe some students are not going to like being associated with the Nazis, and they're going to leave school. Faculty recruitment. This is going to be disastrous for a professor in his career, his or her career. Grant funding from the state or other sources, they're not going to want to fund this, and alumni contributions. Now, the alumni, especially one in particular, defended the swastika name, defended it. But I don't know if the contributions declined. In other words, just like in the late 1930s, this is beginning to hurt New Mexico State's their pocketbook, right? In terms of enrollment and funding and grants and alumni contributions, it's beginning to hurt them, just like it hurt the businesses in the late 1930s. So here's Gerald Thomas. He served from 1980 to 84. And he defended the swastika all the way to the end until this crisis in 1983. Then there were some motion pictures, movies that came out in the early 1980s. Anyone remember Raiders of the Lost Ark? That was a pretty famous movie, and it had to do with the rise of Hitler in North Africa And a lot of people saw that movie, but they were amazed to see this picture at a halftime at an Aggie football game. Wow, that's amazing. And the band, the Pride Band, was playing the music to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and here's 5 of them holding the swastika. It's on page 71 of the 1982 yearbook without a caption explaining it, without a caption. So you got to jump to your own conclusions that there must be a bunch of fascists still roaming around at the New Mexico State campus. And it turns out that the 5 people involved with this felt embarrassed by it. They said they were booed by the crowd. The crowd threw stuff at them, and they were embarrassed by it. But you would never know that if you just saw the yearbook. There was a professor, Jerry Brown. You might remember Jerry Brown. He taught the Holocaust class on campus for about 30 years. And all the meetings he ever went to after this, he would bring out the yearbook and he'd hold it up to page 71. So everybody remembered this thing in particular. Do you remember the 7-part TV series Winds of War from February 1983? And there it is. It was a very good movie about the beginning of World War II. And I watched the whole thing, especially the first minute. And in the first minute, I counted 12 Swastikas, just to remind us. And this could be not only for people of that generation, of World War II's generation, but who else? The young people who were baby boomers, were born after the war. They didn't have such a close association with this crazy symbol. So these are triggers, aren't they? They begin. Josie's Choice? What's the name of the movie? Sophie's Choice, sure. That came out at the same time about concentration camps and the Holocaust. So all these movies are coming to trigger memories or to remind people about the symbol. Letters of protest to the local press, the student newspaper, the Roundup in early 1983. These are just some samples. And I do have to congratulate the campus, because there could have been riots and burnings and all sorts of protests that we've heard about and seen in other parts of the country, maybe even the state. But they were civil. In most cases, they were civil. They wrote letters to the editor. They had rallies. They had forums. They had discussion groups. They had committees, including the publication committee, and also a task force. The student government voted on it twice. The student senate, the faculty senate, voted on it in May as well. So this is very civil. Now there was some exception. There was some hate letters and calls, phone calls made to one of the student organizers in protest against the yearbook. But that was an unfortunate exception rather than the rule. So they had organized protest. They had good leadership under a grad student named Paula Steinbach. She was a veteran, a naval veteran from the Vietnam War. History professor Jerry Brown. I was very fortunate to interview him before he passed away. Gerald Thomas, and then Tony Anaya. And I was able to interview him too. Do you remember Tony Anaya? He was most controversial because he did what to 5 convicts on death row. He converted their sentences to life in prison. It's very controversial. But he told me that on an ethnic or a moral level, this decision to oppose a swastika name, he considered equal to that very controversial decision and opposed to capital punishment. So there's Tony Anaya. So the vote came. The students voted 60 to 40% to keep the name. That sounds pretty overwhelming, but just like before, it was still a small minority of the students who ever bothered to come out and vote. And based on that vote, an unofficial vote by the students, the student senate voted 16 to 7 to keep the name, and they did it twice. They were asked to vote again, and still by a large majority, they wanted to keep the name. The faculty voted, it was a voice vote, and they voted to change the name. Why do they have voice votes? Why do politicians do that, including faculty senators? They don't want to be identified with one side or the other. It's cover, isn't it? It's cover. But it was a clear decision, voice vote to change the name. The publications board wanted to change the name 4-0. And then the culmination of this whole thing comes with the regents meeting at the very end of the spring semester, May 6, 1938. It's a clash of views. All the major actors are there. It's standing room only. They have new regents. Regents consisted of 5 people. 1 was not going to be there, and 2 were brand new. So who appoints the 2 new regents? The governor. And the governor, of course, is Anaya, and he's opposed to the yearbook. So he appoints 2 regents who are also opposed to the yearbook's name. So everybody knew this going in with the new regents, and everybody had their chance to speak. The dramatic testimony, the final testimony by the participants in the audience, by Nathan Weiselman. Now, Nathan Weiselman was from Germany. He was not in a concentration camp. He fled Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. He fled the Soviet Union and the labor camps there. And he and his family came all the way to Las Cruces to open a business in Las Cruces. And he told the regents and everybody there, I came here to outrun fascism, and now it's caught up with me. And it is very dramatic. This should be a play, don't you think? Sounds like, and he says, in his very dramatic statement, have you forgotten already the Holocaust? And to emphasize it, he bangs his fist on the table. And with that, they vote, the final vote, 3-1 to change the name. They changed the name, and the opposition still existed. That so they went through the summer saying they should have another vote by the regions and do this all over again, but they decided not to do that. So in the fall, they came up with a new name. They came up, they had asked everyone to make suggestions. One was the Mañana. I like that. They wanted to make it real Southwestern. Another one was the Adios. The other one was just being stubborn. They said, let's go back to the Swastika. And my favorite, my absolute favorite, was someone suggested the Swastika spelled backwards. I don't even know how to say that, but we're going to get the Swastika in here one way or another. But they didn't. Instead, they renamed it the Phoenix, which was a good name because it was going to rise from the ashes of the swastika, right? And it did for 10 years. And then that interest in the yearbook here at State and all across the country began to fade by the 1990s and thereafter. Because students, for better or worse, it's a shame. It's not as much of a community on campus. I remember when we went to school, everybody knew who the freshmen were, everybody knew who the sophomores were, and the seniors, of course. Now it's mostly a commuter campus, and people don't necessarily know who's who on campus. So there's not that unity that is captured in those yearbooks. And then they have many big classes. Jerry's fortunate, he had a class of 14 today. But very often they have classes like this. And so it's very impersonal. You don't know other people in your class. And then, of course, we blame social media. If you really want to stay in touch with your classmates, you just do it on Facebook, whatever those things are, right? So people stay in touch, but not like they used to with the yearbooks. At the very end, they renamed it the Echo. It was a echo of this former self by the 1990s, and then it faded away like an echo. Sure. Anyone have any other comments or questions about the fate of the yearbook? Oh my gosh, I think I might have to tell another joke. I got to leave you with another joke. I promised my wife not to tell you this joke, but don't tell her I told you, all right? This will get you going after this very dismal presentation. Okay, there. She's going to give me an egg for this one. I know it for sure. There was a little woman about 5 feet tall, and she was going to take a bus. And you know, those bus steps are really high. And she had a tight skirt on. So the bus comes up and opens the door, and she tries to get her leg up there, and she can't do it. Can't make it. And the people behind her are kind of nervous. Come on, lady, you'll get on the bus. And so she pulls her hand behind her back and pulls down the zipper a little bit to think if that's going to help. So she tries again, still didn't work. She puts her hand again down her back and pulls it down just a little bit more and tries it again. She tries it, it doesn't work. She tries it 3 times. She pulls down the zipper a little further 3 times, and she still can't get on the bus. Finally, the guy behind her, a big guy, picks her up and puts her on the bus. And she turns around, she says, "How dare you? I don't even know you." And he says, "Well, I thought you did. You pulled down my zipper 3 times. So there's my egg for tonight. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. Bad joke.